Hannah took a deep breath, her professional demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. She placed the tray down on an empty seat beside her, hands trembling ever so slightly. Her voice, though steady, carried a weight that made the surrounding conversations vanish. "Mr. Musk," she began, her words measured, "I've worked in this industry for 20 years. I've seen the world change in ways I couldn't have imagined. But there's something about the cost of that change that's been eating at me." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity giving way to an almost imperceptible edge of caution. He nodded, encouraging her to continue. "You're hailed as a visionary, a pioneer reshaping humanity's future. But I wonder if you ever think about the other side of that progress. The people who've been left behind, the ecosystems destroyed, the workers who've sacrificed everything to keep your empire growing." A murmur rippled through the cabin, passengers exchanging uneasy glances. Some subtly leaned in, eager to catch every word. Elon sat back, folding his hands in his lap, his face unreadable. Hannah pressed on, her voice gaining strength. "Do you ever think about the real cost, Mr. Musk? Beyond the balance sheets and shareholder returns? The families displaced by your factories, the laborers underpaid and overworked, the children who will inherit a planet stripped of resources in the name of innovation." For a moment, the cabin was silent save for the hum of the engines. Elon's lips twitched, forming a small, contemplative smile. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Hannah, isn't it?" he said, his tone calm yet piercing. "You're right to ask these questions. Progress comes with costs. No one can deny that. But isn't the alternative worse? Standing still while the world burns? Isn't striving to solve humanity's biggest problems worth the sacrifices, painful as they might be?" Hannah didn't flinch, meeting his gaze head on. "Sacrifices should be shared, not borne by the most vulnerable. The people who clean your factories, who mine the minerals for your batteries, they don't get to share in the vision. They're just collateral damage to you." The tension in the cabin was electric now, passengers frozen in their seats. Elon leaned back again, his expression more serious. "You're not wrong," he admitted, his voice quieter. "But the question isn't just about what's wrong. It's about how to make it right. How do you suggest we move forward, Hannah?" The challenge hung in the air, and for a moment it felt as though the entire plane held its breath, waiting for her answer. Hannah's bitter smile didn't waver as she took a measured step closer, her arms folding across her chest. "Forward for whom, Mr. Musk?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "For those of us fortunate enough to sit in this cabin, sipping champagne and discussing visions of Mars? Or for the countless individuals who will never have the luxury of dreaming about the stars because they're too busy surviving today?" The cabin was utterly still now, the kind of quiet that made every word reverberate like a shout. Passengers stared, transfixed, some visibly uncomfortable, others leaning forward as though drawn into an unspoken pact to witness this rare confrontation. Elon's expression hardened slightly, the faint amusement in his eyes replaced by something more solemn. "Hannah," he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of defense, "I don't take these issues lightly. The people on the ground, the workers, the communities, they're all part of this vision. But transformative change is messy. You can't build a better future without breaking a few lives." Hannah interrupted, her voice sharp. "Is that what you're about to say? That sacrifice is inevitable?" "Maybe it is. But the problem is, who gets to decide whose sacrifices matter? Is it you? Is it the shareholders who cheer your quarterly profits? Because it's never the people actually doing the sacrificing." A murmur rose again, a wave of unease washing over the cabin. Elon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locked on hers. "You seem to have a lot of thoughts on this, Hannah," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "What would you have me do? Scrap every project? Shut down every factory? Walk away from innovation because it's not perfect?" Hannah didn't miss a beat. "No," she said firmly, "but I'd have you look harder at the people who make those innovations possible. Pay them fairly, treat them with dignity, Stop pretending that humanity's future can only be built on the backs of its most vulnerable. The room held its collective breath as Elon sat back, his face a mask of contemplation. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze drifting out the window to the endless sky beyond. Finally, he turned back to her, his tone quieter but resolute. "You're right," he said. "I've made mistakes. I've overlooked things in the name of progress. But the truth is, I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to solve problems on a scale humanity's never faced before. It's not perfect, and it probably never will be, but I'm listening, and I'll do better." Hannah studied him, her face unreadable. Then, with a nod that carried both acknowledgement and lingering skepticism, she stepped back. "I hope you mean that," she said simply, before turning and walking away, leaving behind a cabin heavy with reflection and the unmistakable sense that something profound had even billions. Hannah shook her head, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "That's easy to say when you're not the one who's been pushed aside. You talk about helping billions, but how can that matter when you can't even take care of the people who are building your vision right now?" A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin. A woman across the aisle, dressed in a sharp business suit, nodded solemnly. "She's got a point," someone murmured, barely audible but loud enough to break the silence. Elon sighed, rubbing his temples as though grappling with the weight of her words. "Look," he said finally, "I can't undo what's already happened. I can't go back and fix every mistake or prevent every hardship, but I can listen, and I can try to do better moving forward. Tell me, what would you have me do? How can I make this right?" Hannah stared at him for a long moment, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Start by acknowledging the people who make all of this possible," she said, gesturing around the cabin. "Not just the engineers and scientists, but the workers on the ground. The ones who don't get any of the glory but bear all the weight. Pay them fairly, give them security, show them that their sacrifices mean something." Elon nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as though processing her words on a deeper level. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been so focused on the big picture that I've lost sight of the details. I'll do better. I owe it to people like your brother, and to everyone who's made these dreams possible." The cabin fell silent again, but this time the tension had shifted. There was a sense of resolution, however tentative, in the air. Hannah nodded, stepping back, her composure returning. "I hope you mean that," she said quietly. "Because words won't change anything. Actions will." Elon didn't reply immediately, but his expression suggested he understood the weight of her challenge. As Hannah turned and walked back to the galley, the passengers exchanged glances, some looking thoughtful, others murmuring quietly. It wasn't the kind of confrontation anyone had expected at 30,000 feet, but for those who witnessed it, it was a moment that would linger, a challenge to power, a call for accountability, and perhaps a small step toward a better kind of progress. The cabin fell silent once more, the weight of Hannah's words crashing over the passengers like a wave. Even the persistent hum of the engines seemed distant in the tension-filled atmosphere. Elon's jaw tightened, his hands clasped together on the tray table before him. His eyes met Hannah's, no longer guarded but contemplative. He took a slow breath, his usual confident demeanor giving way to something more vulnerable. "You're not wrong," he admitted, his voice quieter now, almost lost in the charged stillness of the cabin. "I spend so much time focused on the big picture, on the future, that I forget to look down. I can't defend every decision I've made or the consequences they've had." Hannah folded her arms, her posture unwavering. "Then maybe it's time you start listening to the people who are living in that down," she said, "because they don't get to fly at 30,000 feet and dream about Mars. They're just trying to make it to tomorrow." The murmur among the passengers grew louder now, as though the collective voice of those who felt unseen and unheard was rising. More than a few faces bore looks of quiet approval, emboldened by Hannah's words. The plane lurched again, and a nervous gasp rippled through the cabin. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into McCarran International. Please remain seated and secure all loose items. Flight attendants, take your seats. Hannah glanced toward the galley, her professional instincts tugging her away from the confrontation. But she turned back to Elon one last time. You have the power to change things, she said firmly. Not just for the future, but for now. For the people who've been left behind in the shadow of your ambition. Use it. Elon gave a small nod, his expression serious, almost solemn. I'll think about it, he said, and I'll try to do better. That's all I can promise for now. Hannah held his gaze for a moment longer, as if weighing the sincerity of his words, before finally stepping away to take her seat for landing. The passengers exchanged quiet murmurs, the earlier tension giving way to a somber reflection. Elon leaned back in his seat, staring out the window as the lights of Las Vegas came into view below. A city built on ambition, risks, and sacrifice. As the plane touched down safely, the weight of the exchange lingered. For everyone on board, it was clear. This wasn't just a routine flight. It was a moment that had challenged power, confronted privilege, and perhaps planted the seed of change. Hannah took a deep breath, her gaze dropping momentarily before meeting Elon's again. He's trying, she said quietly. He found another job, but it pays less, and the hours are grueling. He's got 2 kids and a mortgage, and he's doing everything he can to keep it together. But the spark he used to have, the pride in what he did, that's gone. Her voice wavered, and for a moment the strong, composed woman seemed on the verge of breaking. He used to talk about the future with excitement. Now he just talks about surviving the next week. And I can't blame him. That job was his life, his identity, and it was taken from him like it didn't matter. Elon's expression softened. He seemed to take in her words, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. I can't pretend to understand what he's been through, he said slowly. But I hear you. And I hear him. Hannah studied him, her sharp features searching for sincerity in his face. It's not just about hearing, she said firmly. It's about doing. You have the resources, the influence. You can make decisions that don't just push for progress, but also protect the people who help make that progress possible. The murmurs among the passengers had quieted now, the cabin holding its collective breath once more. Even the distant wail of emergency vehicle sirens outside seemed muted in the gravity of the moment. Elon leaned back in his seat, his gaze distant but thoughtful. You're right, he said finally. I've been so focused on the destination that I've ignored the journey. Maybe it's time I start asking myself who's being left behind along the way. The cabin seemed to exhale as one, the tension easing slightly. Hannah nodded, her expression resolute. That's all I'm asking, she said. Look at the people, not just the numbers. Make choices that don't just move humanity forward, but keep humanity intact. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, breaking the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, emergency personnel will be boarding shortly to assist with the situation. Please remain seated until instructed otherwise. The spell of the confrontation was broken, but its impact lingered. As the doors opened and uniformed responders stepped aboard, Elon and Hannah shared a final look, one of mutual understanding, perhaps even respect. For the passengers, it was a flight they would never forget. For Elon Musk, it was a confrontation that might change the way he approached his empire. And for Hannah, it was a moment of speaking truth to power, a reminder that even at 30,000 feet, humanity's struggles are impossible to escape. As the plane touched the sky once again, Hannah sat by the window, her reflection merging with the clouds. The confrontation with Elon Musk lingered in her mind, a moment where she dared to speak not just for herself, but for countless others left behind in the name of progress. She knew it wouldn't bring her brother back, but it had sparked something undeniable. In the weeks that followed, headlines across the nation told a surprising story. Elon Musk wasn't just listening, he was acting. Meetings with displaced workers, pledges for job retraining programs, and visits to struggling communities painted a picture of a man grappling with the human cost of innovation. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step forward, a rare acknowledgement from someone so far removed. Hannah returned to her routine as a flight attendant. Things had shifted. Passengers occasionally recognized her, offering quiet smiles or words of support. Yet, she knew this wasn't about her. It was about the people whose struggles had gone unnoticed for too long. Change wouldn't come overnight, but the spark had been lit. One afternoon, a package arrived for her at work. Inside, a handwritten note from Musk thanked her for opening his eyes. Alongside it was a check for a nonprofit supporting families affected by layoffs. The gesture was small compared to the challenges ahead, but it spoke volumes. She folded the note, feeling a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. For Hannah, the journey wasn't about victory. It was about being heard. Her brother's story became a symbol, a reminder that even the most powerful could be held accountable. Progress wasn't just about technology, it was about humanity and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. As she prepared for another flight, Hannah glanced out the window. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she believed in the possibility of change. Her brother's legacy lived on in the ripples she had created, and that was enough to keep her moving forward.